Hi, everybody. Welcome to Anne Angel's Reading Room, where we are still on the Courtship of Miles Standish by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Last time we left off at the end of section 7, and Miles Standish had been at an incredible battle with the Indians, and he came home with an Indian head to show that he had the victory. And they took the head and they put it up on the wall or the fence around the village, and everybody was happy that he had rescued them and saved them from the Indians. But Priscilla was a little grossed out, and she was glad that she hadn't married him. So now we're at section 8, and this section is called the spinning wheel. And in this section, we learn a lot more about what's going on with John and Priscilla and what Miles is doing. He's still out fighting battles. But this section happens several months after the last section. So you have to think about last time we were in the spring, now we're in the fall. And so listen carefully as we hear, because I'm just going to tell you, this is kind of a really important section. So listen up, okay? Let's see what happens. The spinning wheel, section 8. Month after month passed away, and in autumn the ships of the merchants came with kindred and friends, with cattle and corn for the pilgrims. All in the village was peace. The men were intent on their labors, busy with hewing and building, with garden plot and with merestead, busy with breaking the glebe and mowing the grass in the meadows, searching the sea for its fish and hunting the deer in the forest. All in the village was peace, but at times the rumor of warfare filled the air with alarm and the apprehension of danger. Bravely the stalwart Miles Standish was scouring the land with his forces, waxing valiant in fighting, and defeating the alien armies, till his name had become a sound of fear to the nations. Anger was still in his heart, but at times the remorse and contrition, which in all noble creatures succeed the passionate outbreak, came like a rising tide that encounters the rush of a river, staying its current a while, but making it bitter and brackish. Meanwhile, Alden, at home, had built him a new habitation, solid, substantial, of timber rough-hewn from the firs of the forest. Wooden barred was the door, and the roof was covered with rushes. Latticed the windows were, and the window panes were of paper, oiled to admit the light, while wind and rain were excluded. There, too, he dug a well, and around it planted an orchard. Still may be seen to this day some trace of the well in the orchard. Close to the house was the stall, where, safe and secure from annoyance, Raghorn, the snow-white steer, had fallen to Alden's allotment in the division of cattle, might ruminate in the night time over the pastures he cropped, made fragrant by sweet pennyroyal. Oft when his labor was finished, with eager feet would the dreamer follow the pathway that ran through the woods to the house of Priscilla. Led by illusions romantic and subtle deceptions of fancy, pleasure disguised as duty, and love in the semblance of friendship. Ever of her he thought when he fashioned the walls of his dwelling. Ever of her he thought when he delved in the soil of his garden. Ever of her he thought when he read in his Bible on Sunday praise of the virtuous woman, as she is described in the Proverbs. How the heart of her husband doth safely trust in her always. How all the days of her life she will do him good and not evil. How she seeketh the wool and the flax that worketh with gladness. How she layeth her hand to the spindle and holdeth the distaff. How she is not afraid of the snow for herself or her household, knowing her household are clothed with scarlet cloth of her weaving. So, as she sat at her wheel one afternoon in the autumn, Alden, who opposite sat and was watching her dexterous fingers, as if the thread she was spinning were that of his life and his fortune, after a pause in their talk, thus spake to the sound of the spindle. "Truly, Priscilla," he said, When I see you spinning and spinning, never an idle a moment, but thrifty and thoughtful of others, suddenly you are transformed, are visibly changed in a moment. You are no longer Priscilla, but Bertha, the beautiful spinner. Here the light foot on the treadle grew swifter and swifter. The spindle uttered an angry snarl, and the thread snapped short in her fingers, while the impetuous speaker, not heeding the mischief, continued, "You are the beautiful Bertha, the spinner, the queen of Helvetia, she whose story I read at a stall in the streets of Southampton, who, as she rode on her palfrey o'er valley and meadow and mountain, ever was spinning her thread from a distaff fixed to her saddle. She was so thrifty and good that her name passed into a proverb. So shall it be with your own. When the spinning wheel shall no longer hum in the house of the farmer and fill its chambers with music, then shall the mothers reproving relate how it was in their childhood, praising the good old times and the days of Priscilla the spinner." Straight up rose from her the wheel, the beautiful Puritan maiden, pleased with the praise of her thrift from him whose praise was the sweetest, drew from the reel on the table a snowy skein of spinning, thus making answer, meanwhile, to the flattering phrases of Alden. "Come, you must not be idle. If I am a pattern of housewives, show yourself equally worthy of being the model of husbands. Hold this skein in your hands while I wind it ready for knitting. Then who knows but hereafter, when fashions have changed and the manners, fathers may talk to their sons of the good old times of John Alden." Thus, with a jest and a laugh, the skein on his hands she adjusted. He, sitting awkwardly there with his arms extended before him, she, standing graceful, erect, and winding the thread from his fingers, sometimes chiding a little his clumsy manner of holding, sometimes touching his hands as she disentangled expertly twist or knot in the yarn, unawares, for how could she help it, sending electrical thrills through every nerve in his body. Lo, in the midst of this scene, a breathless messenger entered, bringing in hurry and heat of the terrible news from the village. Yes, Miles Standish was dead. An Indian had brought them the tidings, slain by a poisoned arrow, shot down in the front of the battle, into an ambush beguiled, cut off with the whole of his forces. All the town would be burned, and all the people be murdered. Such were the tidings of evil that burst on the hearts of the hearers. Silent and statue-like stood Priscilla, her face looking backward still at the face of the speaker, her arms uplifted in horror. But John Alden, upstarting as if the barb of the arrow piercing the heart of his friend had struck his own, and had sundered once and forever the bonds that held him bound as a captive, wild with the excess of sensation, the awful delight of his freedom, mingled with pain and regret, unconscious of what he was doing, clasped almost with a groan the motionless form of Priscilla, pressing her close to his heart as forever his own, and exclaiming, "Those whom the Lord hath united, let no man put them asunder." Even as rivulets twain from distant and separate forces, seeing each other afar as they leap from the rocks, and pursuing each one in its devious path, but drawing nearer and nearer, rush together at last at their trysting place in the forest, so these lives had run thus far in separate channels, coming in sight of each other, then swerving and flowing asunder, parted by barriers strong, but drawing nearer and nearer, rushed together at last, and one was lost in the other. So we have bad news. Miles Standish is dead. But we also have good news. Because he's dead, that means John Alden doesn't feel like he's betraying his friend anymore. And now he can really marry Priscilla. What do you think will happen? You think they'll get married? It's sad about Miles Standish, though. I kind of liked him. Didn't you? I guess we'll have to wait and see what else happens in the next section. So I'll see you then. By the way, the next section, it's called Wedding Day. A very important section indeed. I'll see you next time.